Good afternoon. I am Brittany Lewis, the Director of Community Education and Engagement here at PAFA. I want to say a huge thank you for you all being here in person, and to you all who are virtual, welcome from near and far. Today is a special day for us at PAFA. It's our first Art at Noon of 2026, so a round of applause for being here with us for that. Especially in the snowstorm that we've gotten here in Philadelphia. So thank you. I know that it wasn't the May weather that we wanted. So we are so grateful. Also, Art at Noon, I welcome you to join us and really be a part of our community. This is one of our programs that we consider an anchor, something that's romantic and you know is coming. These are typically on Wednesdays. Typically the first Wednesday of every month at noon. So come and be a part of it, right? I want you all to kind of walk in here as if it were your coffee shop, and you are welcomed and we become familiar faces with one another. Smile, say hello, and know that consistently you can join us on Wednesdays for Art Talk. Today is going to be a deep dive into a special collection that's coming here, Bodies and Souls. And so I welcome you to take a listen to the original curator, Bob Cozzolino, who will come up in a minute. But ask questions, right? This is your opportunity to really engage with us. We want you all to kind of shape the conversation just as much as we do. And then I know I pitched Art at Noon. We'll have another one February 4th. I hope to see all of your faces. We also have additional programs that will celebrate this collection. So come back and join us here in this room. Pull out your phones, mark your calendars. March 19th, we will have a film screening and a talk back with the producer, Evan Goodchild. So I'd love to have you guys here for an evening to celebrate this collection. And then a fast follow, April 16th, we will have an additional program with our artists, some of the artists that are in the collection. So Didier William, an alum of PAFA, a staff alum, if you would call it, and Craig Calderwood will also be here from the West Coast, both artists in this collection. So please come and really be a part of the programs, the community, and everything that we're building here at the Academy. And then I'd like to introduce to you all a colleague of mine, Michelle Donnelly. Can you please come up? Give her a round of applause, please. Michelle is going to kick us off today and tell you more about the collection. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Brittany. Hi, everyone. For those who haven't met me, my name is Michelle Donnelly. I'm the new Evelyn and Will Kaplan Curator of 20th Century Art. And Bob Cozzolino was my predecessor in this role, so I'm so excited to welcome him today. We worked together back in 2013 to 14 when I was a curatorial assistant here at PAFA. So now here I am taking on his very big shoes to fill for this role. So thank you for joining us today, Bob. I also want to plug, we have a beautiful catalog for the show that will be in the store soon. And please join us for the opening of the exhibition March 14th, and it will be on view until July. So Brittany, do you have words to say next, or should I turn it to Bob?
You've got it. Go, Bob.
Okay, well, please join me in welcoming Bob Cozzolino back to PAFA.
Thanks, Michelle. Yep. You're like tech and everything.
Thank you, everybody. Hopefully this is on. Kevin Martin. Doesn't sound like it is.
We'll make sure. Can you guys
I'll just
all hear
scream.
Bob? Yeah.
Having come from Minneapolis, maybe I should. Yeah, okay, there we go, maybe. Yeah. So I'm happy to be back here. I worked at PAFA from 2004 to 2016. Philadelphia always feels like a second or third home now, because Minneapolis really feels like home after growing up in Chicago and living there for so long. But I am hoping that you'll come back for the show, which goes over the summer. It celebrates the collection of Francis and Rob Kohler, who are bequesting about 500 works to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. They lived in West Philly. They raised a family here. They collected on a relatively modest income and did remarkable things by collecting artists under the radar. And so the show actually opens at PAFA on the 13th, which is a Friday of March, so Friday the 13th. And then there is a complimentary exhibition at the Woodmere Art Museum that opens March 14th, because Rob and Francis, not only have they been generous to PAFA, but they also have been generous to the Woodmere Art Museum. So the gifts they've given Woodmere over the years will be on view there simultaneously, and it's all collected in this catalog. So like I said, I live in Minneapolis now, and I know that you've been looking at the news. If over the last few weeks you've been thinking, how can I help? Here's how you can help. Even though there's been some talk about de-escalating, things are still really bad in Minneapolis. It is really like we are under an occupation by an authoritarian government that has a paramilitary terrorist group infiltrating the city and actually kidnapping people, whether they're citizens or not, and not really thinking about what the actual status is. Never mind that people shouldn't be considered illegal. So it's a mess. It's really terrifying, but I am very heartened by how resilient my community is and how we stand up for one another, stand up for our neighbors. And maybe that's Homeland Security, I don't know. And it's really been amazing to see how everybody's risen up and resisted and filmed the things that are happening, because they need to be documented and held accountable. So there you are. Gladys Nilsson's large watercolor, Checking Out the Other Side, which is on the screen here from 1987, expresses a desire to embrace the unknown, to leave the comfort zone, to move with curiosity and courage. It makes confronting the shadows an act of liberation, suggesting that if we make peace with new worlds, we might experience another consciousness and traverse multiple dimensions. A woman stands curious, delighted before a portal. Her hands tenderly hold the edges as she steps through to the other side. Nilsson depicts a rent in the fabric of the everyday and the possibilities that might unfold from entering it. It is a clear assertion of realities adjacent to our own. This embrace of a parallel reality characterizes much of the art that attracted Rob and Francis Kohler, who you see here on the screen. Francis passed away a few years ago. Rob is with us and I think is listening in. Rob and Francis both had lives in academia and science. He taught at Penn. She was an editor and a translator, and both very much involved in the science community. The first time I visited their home, I recognized that they were kindred spirits who knew the pleasures of the margins, the places off map, the realm beyond the mysterious portal. We share a love for artists who explore and depict such places with clarity and precision, or assert that these places are within us. These artists often show us the vulnerable condition of being in the body. And these are just views of how they lived with their collection. Many makers in the Kohler Collection acknowledge the existence of the unseen, the unfamiliar, that which is below the surface, and the unknown in order to reveal a deeper truth. Didier William, for instance, radically reimagines figuration through the use of intertwined silhouettes and bodies carved into wood panels. Figures are elastic, slipping in and out of sight, and moving fluidly between dimensions. The eyes that coat the central body in this work, Dancing, Pouring, Crackling, and Mourning, from 2015, are formed by cutting into the surface, excavating a pattern that is protective, enacting an apotropaic power. The eyes provide agency in other ways, a heightened awareness and ability to see the past, present, and future with supernatural clarity. These characteristics are necessary for bodies that are under surveillance, living in unfamiliar places, or protecting members of their communities. In much of the imagery of this collection, artists reveal aspects of themselves usually reserved for intimates, written in private journals, or contemplated alone in the mirror. Anne Minnick's Feral Nun, which you see here from 2012 and 2013,
is a full-length self-portrait done in graphite and placed into a structure like a reliquary container, with doors that close on the image. Minnick presents herself, vulnerably and with tenderness, at age 79. She is also assertive and defiant, carrying herself confidently and displaying the exquisite skill and attention that this personal altar requires. Minnick made the drawing while recovering from cancer and chemotherapy. The subtly out-of-scale head was, quote, an indication of feeling my body had taken over. I felt all body, she notes. Her left foot steps forward into the future, and she will survive this experience. Her right hand bears a bandaged finger. She has wounds, but she remains resilient and inspires others who might look to her for hope and strength. The Kohler Collection shows how much artists have at stake in depicting lived experience. And this is Luis Cruz Azaceta's Bolsero, which is in the show upstairs. Throughout the 20th century and in the 21st, critics have periodically heralded a return to figuration. Let us be clear once and for all. There has never been a return to figuration because the figure has always been relevant to humanity, perpetually top of mind for artists concerned with their communities, understanding themselves, and aware of how bodies can powerfully convey our values. Luis Cruz Azaceta emphasized this when he asserted in an interview, quote, my concern is with humanity. I want to confront the viewer with life and what we are doing to each other. I hope to awaken in the viewer a sense of compassion. Without compassion, there is nothing. Azaceta's remarks highlight a powerful undercurrent in this collection, empathy. The methods, subjects, and tone of much of the work convey an awareness of being in the body, the sorrow, joy, desire, hope, and disgust, the full range of what it means to be human. Robin Francis began collecting with focus in the early 1980s after visiting two large exhibitions of representational art. The first, Contemporary American Realism since 1960, took place in 1981 at PAFA. And here's a few installation photos of that exhibition held in the Historic Landmark Building, because this building wasn't in use yet. And I want to draw your attention to Sidney Goodman and Martha Erlbacher, both artists who have a long history with Philadelphia. This is Sidney's painting, which is now at PAFA. The Kohlers did not buy that, but this painting by Martha Erlbacher was in that show. Eventually, the Kohlers bought and will be on view at Woodmere. The other exhibition that they saw was actually a series of 11 exhibitions coordinated simultaneously along 57th Street in Manhattan called Bodies and Souls in 1983. The PAFA collection, curated by Frank Goodyear Jr., was a large lone exhibition that situated contemporary realism within a long lineage of American art. The latter, this one, was led by artists working without a permanent venue who responded to, quote, the broader community's desire for greater access to contemporary representational art. They felt that over the previous decade, quote, an entire community of figurative artists were largely ignored by the institutions of the art world. This is Sidney Goodman's A Waste, which has been on view at Woodmere recently, and the Kohlers helped fund the purchase of this. Together, the exhibitions presented a wide range of approaches to depicting the visible world, showing that realism is polyphonic, expressed in numerous registers, colors, tones, and speeds. Many exhibitions of the time in the early 80s, when the Kohlers started collecting, reimagined figuration. They bore the impact of a field in transition, beginning to shrug off the formalist teleological dogma that had plagued considerations of modern art in the United States. It was also the beginning of a concentrated art world interest in how artists expressed identity and lived experience. While each show was eye-opening, Rob has reflected that Bodies and Souls, this coordinated series of exhibitions, quote, was more adventurous and diverse, including much that was expressionistic, fantastic, raunchy, or all-out weird, a visual cornucopia. Here were artists established and unknown, exploring all sorts of figuration, and energized by a sense of escaping or subverting mainstream orthodoxies. For Rob, Bodies and Souls was a revelation. Quote, I have a vivid memory of being there and feeling the excitement. It was intimate and personal. The catalog was our collecting and gallery guide on the edges of our expanding taste. Azaceta's monumental self-portrait, Apocalypse Now or Later from 1981, which you see on the screen here and will be upstairs, was included in Bodies and Souls. Azaceta, a Cuban exile who came to the United States in the wake of Castro's revolution, has long been committed to confrontational anti-war imagery. Here he references the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the New Testament book of Revelation, except Azaceta has made himself the single herald riding a creature that resembles a monstrous hybrid horse rat. He was living in New York in the late 70s. He sounds a twisted blue horn, springing over the grisly carnage of mutilated bodies against a backdrop of further flying body parts in massive radiating flames. At the time, Azaceta was consumed with anxieties about nuclear war and the U.S. government's abandonment of the working class and poor. The Kohler sought out artists whose representational work conveys perceptions beyond sight. All senses make it into art, including paintings made through a realist method. Reality is conditional, contextual, cultural, and situational. It is subjective, and the artists in the Kohler Collection assure with veracity, tenacity even, that what you see is their reality. Gregory Gillespie expressed it in phenomenological and spiritual language, telling interviewers, quote, "I know there are other structures of reality existing that we can't see." His painting, Lydia and Her Demon, which you see here, from 1988, is a double portrait that shows a woman in three-quarter view, looking off in the distance. Her hair is neatly covered by a floral patterned wrap that follows the curve of her skull. She wears a thin pale green tank top and necklace. Next to her, just behind her right shoulder, is another being whose head and neck resemble an assemblage of flower petals and plant forms. Its head swells outward like a blossom and is much larger than hers. The eyes are narrow, set close, mouth and nose lie on a vertical axis along the face, with a third orifice at the forehead. Lines radiate out from each aperture and the flesh curves away and around its head. Its presence is unnerving, although it makes no gesture or expression of menace. The woman does not seem perturbed by its presence. Perhaps she's used to it. Perhaps she no longer sees it. Lydia, who lived between 1963 and 2015, was the daughter of Gregory and Frances Cohen Gillespie, both artists represented in the collection and whose work will be on view upstairs. According to a family member, Lydia struggled with tenacious demons. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder as an adult and struggled with addiction. Lydia worked through dependency issues and volunteered with a peer-led program helping those living with addiction in Greenfield, Massachusetts. It was an ongoing challenge for her to remain sober. The demon, though Lydia's, appears in numerous instances in Gillespie's work of the period. He knew it to morph, shapeshift, walk on all fours, and permeate the world in many other ways. And here I'm showing you a drawing by Gillespie called Manic Depression. We all have demons, Gillespie seems to say. They are tangible, sit next to us or ride our backs. They peer over our shoulders and listen to our thoughts. Perhaps they even talk back. Why not visualize them? Maybe that is the best way to make peace with them and acknowledge they are companions. Find equilibrium together. Speaking about his own demons in relation to creativity, Gillespie claimed, quote, "It is a continuous tension to stay in reality. Chaos and disorder are always threatening. It's a constant struggle not to let things get out of hand, to maintain some control. There's a lot of instability in the world, so I seek to make an art that is disturbing, provocative, self-challenging, and self-questioning. It is important to me that I use this anxiety for a worthy purpose," end quote. For Gillespie and others in the Kohler Collection, these parts of one's personality were real and essential ingredients of representation. Jane Lund has made images that originated in her subconscious, and I'm showing you a pastel in the collection that'll be on view upstairs by her from the mid-70s. Presented in dreams that she translated in her waking life by restaging what she remembered for reference photographs. As she worked, she allowed for free association to embellish the composition. She wrote, quote, "In the way a dream bubbles up from that layer of the mind that knows all and reveals what it knows in such beautiful and tricky ways, my early paintings seem to be symbolic disclosures of my inner being." Lund took these images to represent who she was and what shaped her personality and drives. In the pastel Party for Myself, made between 1974 and 75, 4 women sit at a round table set with a white tablecloth and a single candle burning low at the center. The woman closest to us turns to smile, inviting us to join them. At right, another woman in a lavender and white dress, decorated with flowers and birds, wears a garland in her hair, perhaps marking the winter solstice and the gradual return of light. Her companion to the right is nude, at least from the waist up, except for a large blue bauble necklace and a knit cap sprouting little horns. Finally, at far left, a 4th guest looks off to the windows with large, nearly lidless eyes, mouth agape. Her skin is pale green, a tone just lighter and bluer than that of the walls. Her features are exaggerated, her nose upturned, and her face creased with wrinkles, her hairline receded. Lund describes this drawing as representing different aspects of herself. The woman in the blue is her social, outgoing, and friendly personality. The woman at right is spiritual, aiming to be pure of heart and intentions. The woman to her right is Lund's sensual self, acting on her desires without shame. And the figure at left is the embodiment of self-loathing. They are all real and compose her full self. The greeting smile of the woman in blue may suggest another aspect of self, rather than us, has joined the party. Lund says, quote, "Even when I was younger, I had a strong sense of layers in ourselves. We all have these parts, and I was always making pictures of the divided self." In Deborah Kravitz's small panel painting, it's only about this big, Woman Drawing Door from 1975, a woman stands with her back to a large wooden door. It is secured in 3 places, near the top, with a 2x4 and with bolts just above the handle. She grips pieces of charcoal tightly in her hands. Her eyes are glassy, as though she has not blinked for many minutes or is on the brink of tears. Tension is strung tight in her body, her shoulders slightly raised, arms taut, fists clenched, expression at the brink like a coiled spring. Her rigid body contrasts with the wild, excessive drawing of a creature on the door at her back. It lurches, reaching with claw-like hands, jagged mouth, the full width of its head. Kravitz has described this image as a self-portrait, a means to examine and come to terms with intergenerational trauma. She wrote, quote, "My fear of intruders," this was set in her Boston apartment in the mid-70s, "resonated with the fear and anger inside of me, the result of childhood neglect and emotional abuse. The monster woman pictured on the door behind the 2x4 bolt did not really exist. The pieces of charcoal I hold imply that I drew the monster, that I am the source of the monster woman. The rage I felt toward my mother at that time made me feel both monstrous and empowered. The self-portrait, along with many other paintings, was a part of an attempt to understand my real self and to come to terms with both the anger and the love I felt for my mother." Throughout modernist criticism, arguments against representation turn on misunderstandings and misreadings of realist art. Just because what is represented can be apprehended and named does not mean it also can carry multiple meanings, as in Kravitz's self-portrait. When painted imagery looks real, it does not necessarily mean the artist's concern is solely with illusion. Some who use a realist method embrace materiality and process and give equal weight to the design underpinning the narrative or feeling conveyed. The modernist prejudice against realism or representational painting, in general, has a long and complex history. Clement Greenberg and subsequent generations of formalist critics instilled a distrust and even disgust of representational painting that became institutionally ingrained in theory, in museum practice, in academia, and among collectors. As early as 1940, Greenberg asserted that realist painters were uncritically imitating a dominant art form, literature, with an incongruous medium, oil paint, or whatever method that people were using on a two-dimensional surface. To him, painters had destroyed purity in their art by aspiring to encompass the properties of another art, narrative and description. In doing so, they had betrayed what was unique to their practice, to leave it, quote, perverted and distorted. Greenberg and his followers rejected vital ways that actual artists worked and marginalized or excluded inconvenient threads of influence. And I'm showing you here artists that were pitted against one another, even though they had a lot in common. Jackson Pollock, who was championed by Greenberg, and Paul Cadmus, George Tooker, and Jared French, who are in a staged photograph by George Platt Lyons. They didn't actually work together. but they're obviously working very small and carefully on small panel paintings. And if you didn't get it already, Paul Cadmus has tacked up on his wall reference points, which include Roman frescoes, but also Piero della Francesca and other kinds of things. And these are two paintings by George Tooker from 1946 and 1947. To many American realists of multiple generations identified with the layers and meaning to be found, these are not in the Kohler Collection, in European painting of the 14th, let me start that again. For American realists of multiple generations, they identified with the layers of meaning to be found in European painting of the 14th through 16th centuries. These panel paintings represent worlds that look familiar, uncanny in their similarity to ours, but their conditions of reality are charged from the outset. Because of their apparent fidelity to the real, as in the work of American realists who adored them, we can forget that what we see is of the imagination, based on things seen, but reality heightened, intensified, in order to embody religious symbolism or other coded references layered in objects and gestured with multiple meanings. What is presented is real, but also is ideas, feelings, a belief system. Looking at the body or objects before him in his studio, Gregory Gillespie challenged himself to look closer and longer, trying to apprehend and depict detail that shows veils and processes happening beneath the skin. And this is his portrait of William Beckman, which is massive. It's bigger than what you see on the screen. It's upstairs. And that's William Beckman, his friend and painter. But this is Gregory Gillespie's body and Gillespie's studio. So it's a strange hybrid. It was as though he was trying to be inside what he was painting in order to feel it, not just see it. He aimed for patient, mindful viewers to recognize that illusion with what he was painting. Gillespie believed there was a reality beyond our senses and asserted, quote, "There's wanting to make it as real as possible in a sensuous way, yet wanting it to be very transitory and ephemeral at the same time. I know that my flesh is made of chemicals and molecules. I know what I'm seeing is a dream. I know consciousness is something totally different, but yet in some powerful way connected to this physical chemical organization," end quote. When the Kohlers began collecting, many critics and curators felt realism equaled objectivity and clinical depiction, a conservative mode of expression. What Gillespie was describing was his awareness that what we call reality is mutable, fluid, and based on bodily and unconscious perceptions. The limits of perception, or rather its extent, are governed by what we are in our physical and cognitive being. Artists deploying the tools of realism are constantly negotiating this recognition of internal reality and external stimuli, processing them together to craft microworlds. Attacks on realism as conservative did not hold in the political climate of the 1980s or beyond, in part because of its use by various communities as a means for clear visibility, making present those who had been rendered absent or their identities erased from the broader narrative of American art. Figuration, and specifically a crisp approach to realism, supported decades of politically aware representational painting made in pluralistic communities that cut an additional path through the history of modern art, and one that was not mutually exclusive of supposed avant-garde strategies. These four paintings are not in, or objects are not in the Kohler Collection, but I'm using these as examples for the context. Artists such as Luis Cruz Azaceta, Robert Arneson, Ido Appelbrug, Roger Brown, Succo, Leanne Golub, Frank Seymour, and David Wojnarowicz, for example, took on the bigotry that led to needless deaths during the AIDS crisis, the madness of nuclear proliferation, and the funding of regimes in Central and South America. These artists engaged the present moment using representational methods to activate the living world, assert presence, and counter violence. And I'm showing you Roger Brown's painting of imagining a nuclear explosion. Leanne Golub, part of his White Squad paintings that were critical of American intervention in Central America and funding of various militias. Frank Seymour painting about his community dying from AIDS, and AIDS Won't Wait, The Enemy Is Here Not in Kuwait, a print that is in PAFA's collection, but not the Kohler Collection, by Succo. Some critics supportive of realism during the 1960s and early 1970s, when many of the artists in the Kohler Collection were beginning their careers, argued that, quote, "the issues involved in the question of realism or representation are ultimately moral ones. Realism was a method that might realize, quote, the deeper social and psychological function of form. This was on the minds of activists and image makers of all genres. The head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's photo agency, Julius Lester, put it like this in 1967, quote, power is not only political, power is also self-confidence. And so you can't have self-confidence if the images you see reflect somebody else's world, how somebody else looks. How can you have confidence in yourself? End quote. He continued, emphasizing the role of self-representation. Quote, Black Americans should be allowed the opportunity to know their own images. We are going to look at ourselves with our own eyes and define ourselves, after we've taken a good look around and found we're a beautiful people. End quote. Robert Neal's Street People, which is on view upstairs, will be in the show, from 1986, embodies that determination to depict a confident, aware, beautiful black man on a city street just as snow begins to fall. Neal, at this time, had had a full career in life, and this later expression of grace conveys the fullness of his own experience as a black artist who had experienced the full and terrible and hopeful arc of the 20th century. Here he sees this man's humanity clearly, and perhaps infuses the figure with his own self-reflection about where he is now, confident in painting with the full range of his talent. Craig Calderwood incorporates multiple materials into figural work that opens up new possibilities for representing the body. And this piece is going to be on view upstairs and is the Kohler Collection. They want viewers to have sensorial experiences before the work, to connect and know intimacy through how these intricate images are composed. They noted in a 2018 interview, quote, I come at making a piece in a constellative way, like when you experience something intensely like a death, a friendship, love, bigotry, all those moments that define those feelings and events are dense with information. When you experience something like that, everything from that moment gets imprinted on you. The textures of the space, the smells, faces, feelings, patterns, the taste in your mouth, all arrange themselves within that memory. By developing a piece with this cache of imagery, I can tell stories that remain sacred and private. This way of communicating is a part of queer and trans history. It's a tool for survival, end quote. In Calderwood's piece here, Notes on Venus and Mars from My 8-Year-Old Self, done in 2018, the person seated on a sofa gestures with their left hand over their heart and holds up a drawing for us to see in their right. Two figures rendered in thin black lines, each holding two swords in outstretched hands. While we might be tempted to gender them based on the scant information provided, and the references to them, Calder told me, quote, Venus and Mars, in the gender symbols of their title, represent them as one interconnected figure. They exude strength together and are aspects of one body. It is a drawing Calderwood made when they were young. The figure holding the drawing also resists binaries. They are present and appeal to us to connect the offered drawing with a tender gesture toward their body, their heart and soul. Their green briefs are decorated with a pattern of cucumbers sliced at the tip, and their raucous, joyful shirt is a dazzling array of juicy berries spilling forth sweetness. A large inflated mask surrounds the figure's head, with a small opening for the mouth, which manifests with barred teeth. Is this a smile, a grimace, a nervous response? It could be all simultaneously. The magic 8-ball pattern on the mask gives the message "hi" in its pink triangle. While the figure could be communicating with us, this could also be a self-portrait in which Calderwood engages across time with their 8-year-old self, holding the image that was inside them, a clue to their identity to reassure them about that as an older person. Calderwood says, quote, one of my goals is to destabilize a person's ability to approach my work with an idea of binary gender. By flooding my pieces with pattern, and by sometimes taking away secondary sex characteristics, it sort of guides the viewer into reading the work differently. I want to disrupt the scrutinizing, heteronormative gaze that seeks to fetishize or be abhorred by the trans body, end quote. Calderwood's remarks emphasize how representational and realist methods are liberatory practices that can be used to assert presence for those omitted from dominant narratives or harmfully depicted by those outside their communities. Realism and representation are a means to show embodied human experience. They can help us imagine the world we want to live in. Representational art has been transformational and critical for artists who want to make themselves and their communities visible on their own terms. It provides the agency to see and to be seen, to show relationships, pleasure, and autonomy. Representing ourselves is a powerful means of celebrating our full humanity. These possibilities in realist paintings have a long history. Virtuoso draftsman and painter Charles White, who's seen here, and then a painting from the early 50s by him is there on the right, not in the Kohler Collection. He asserted in 1940, quote, "Paint is the only weapon I have with which to fight what I resent. If I could write, I would write about it. If I could talk, I would talk about it. Since I paint, I must paint about it." End quote. Speaking about photography, Dawood Bey has asserted, quote, "There were precious few places where one would have encountered black folks in all of their gloriously celebrated human complexity. While these negative images filled the public arena, blacks always knew that these images were not theirs, and the photographic image became important to the visual construction of black community," end quote. Painting has, of course, also been a critical facet of communities taking back representation and creating the images they know of themselves. Artists such as Barclay Hendricks and James Brantley, these are pieces that are in PAFA's collection, both from 1970. On the left, it's Barclay Hendricks' portrait of James Brantley, and then James Brantley's self-portrait on the right. When they were studying at PAFA in the 60s, understood the power of redirecting agency to black artists in communion with black subjects, depicting one another and their peers as they learned the nuances of their craft. The transformational possibilities of representational painting are especially evident in Philadelphia, a place where realist methods have been taught in multiple art schools. Charles Searles, for instance, whose piece you see here on the screen from 1974, was once owned by Barclay and Susan Hendricks, and is now in the Kohler Collection and will be seen at Woodmere. For him, understanding form and how to reproduce it served a personal and spiritual need. As a young man, he spent time drawing and studying from African sculpture at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. He felt a deep connection to the sculpture and those who had made it, and, inspired by those objects, eventually started carving. He recalled, quote, "It was sort of frightening because I had never seen anything like this before. They were strange looking. They had this power. They almost felt like they were alive. I began to feel more myself in the sculpture." Searles enrolled at PAFA, and during the course of his studies was awarded prestigious traveling scholarships that enabled him to visit Morocco, Nigeria, and Ghana in the summer of 1972. On returning to Philadelphia, he became involved with his friend, the artist Barbara Bullock, in the Ile Ife Black Humanitarian Center, led by choreographer and dancer Arthur Hall. Ile Ife became quickly a major center of the black arts movement across genres and an essential intergenerational cultural center in the region. Karen Warrington, a founding member of Hall's Afro-American Dance Ensemble, explained, quote, "To see this whole village of Africans who weren't born in Africa here was satisfying something inside all of us, because we never really just fit in that little box that white society put us in. So then people started figuring out that Ile Ife provided the affirmation of knowing and being celebrated for who you are." Both Searles and Bullock taught at Ile Ife, and their work began to integrate their personal understanding of African culture. It was critical to both of them that they work with students of all ages and openly discuss what it meant to be black in their generation, who they wanted to be, and how they wanted to honor ancestors and prepare a new generation. Searles' experiences in Nigeria had a profound effect on the way he incorporated pattern in his work. He reflected on how in Africa he had seen people using pattern upon pattern in dress in everyday aesthetic choices. His Dancer No. 1, which you've been looking at and admiring, is a dazzling performance equal to the reputation of the dancers active with Hall. The painting highlights the artist's skillful control over more than a dozen separate patterns, unified in a dynamic figure. Arms curved in serpentine lines, hand outstretched, and feet rising up with rhythm, the woman actively conjures music from the color and shapes that sway with her body. Barbara Bullock, and this is a piece that's at Woodmere that was funded with Robert Francis Kohler's generosity, has often depicted bodies active in spiritual ceremonies, initiation rites, and sacred performances. Remembrance from here in 1985 shows a central figure clothed in a deep yellow garment, hands clutching a cowrie shell-covered vessel, rising up tall on bare feet. The figure is in a state of transformation, spirits, snakes, and dancers swirling around them. Bullock's artistic practice is inseparable from her spiritual practice. She has made altars for ancestors and spirits, and her paintings can be understood to attract and honor spirits. She reflects, quote, "Journeying through my African American life, I found an intuitive need to create forms which are protective spirits. They are important as I intend to travel both physically and spiritually through many open areas to become stronger in my creative manifestations and closer to my ancestral heritage." Searles and Bullock were enriched by meeting the artist Twin77, who came to the art department at Ile-Ife while they were teaching there. Bullock explains the impact he had. Quote, "He explained to Charles and me that he was an artist and a musician and a dancer. He went on, and we were like, how do you have time to do work? My God. But when we saw his work, it was like another world, just extraordinary. The forms and the meanings. You could look at it forever, and you'd still never see everything in it. He was Yoruba, so there were a lot of spirits in his work. Well, it was the whole thing, that you can paint spirits, and the freedom of your belief. I was just so inspired, deeply inspired, and just really loving what he did, and I knew it was going to change me." His monumental work, which will be it's been at Woodmere, it's been on view before, and it's in the catalog, and the Kohlers helped purchase it. The Spirits of My Reincarnation Brothers and Sisters, which is actually a second version of a piece that's at the Philadelphia Museum, and he made in 2006-2007. Shows a group of musicians gathering amid a grove of trees, playing instruments and singing. Some beat drums, another strums a stringed instrument, while others sound wind instruments. This is no ordinary band of players. The artist stands in the center, surrounded by, quote, his brothers and sisters on this earth, not biologically related siblings, but people he considered his community. Each of their bodies and the trunks and leaves of the trees are covered in faces. They represent beings in the spirit world, surrounding and protecting twins and his loved ones. Paying attention to the hum that connects us to our ancestors, learning together with generations older and younger than us, these are ways that we persist and thrive as a culture. For artists that came to the United States from the Caribbean, often escaping dangerous political regimes or leaving, as so many immigrants have done, difficult conditions for the hope of better circumstances, representing their stories and their journey has been affirming. Louis Azaceta and Didier William, mentioned earlier, and these are two examples of their work. This is Didier's piece, and Luis Cruz Azaceta's, both will be on view upstairs, came from the U.S. to the U.S. from Cuba and Haiti, respectively. Their state as exiles and as people spiritually connected to another place comes through in a lot of their work, and they speak often about that. Rafael Ferrer came to the U.S. from Puerto Rico in 1966. He initially established himself in Philadelphia and made a reputation in the late 60s and 70s for installation and conceptual work, frequently with performance components. And this is his portrait of Wilfredo Lam, who was an important early mentor for him and is monumental, maybe the same size as that on the screen. It's going to be on view upstairs. After seeing Alex Katz paint outdoors, Ferrer had an epiphany and turned to painting. He had strong friendships with a wide range of artists, including Benny Andrews, Roger Brown, Mel Edwards, Ree Morton, and others. And he remarked, quote, "We were all sharing a particular reality, aware of what was really going on. But when you're in it, you're traveling through the world like a knife through butter. You know your strength, and we know that we are allies in a situation that is ongoing. But we're not making alliances in order to get ahead. We're part of the scene, and each one has to deal with it on their own." End quote. This eclectic mix of friends stimulated Ferrer as he dedicated himself to painting. He started to apply the tools of representational painting to suggest the complexity of his immigrant experience in many, many examples. He made numerous self-portraits and portraits of the people in his community, and on visits back to the various places in the Caribbean. El Bolero, which is here, will be up on view upstairs from 1983 and 84, commemorates a reunion of friends playing music together and singing. Music was central in Ferrer's life. He was a drummer and played professionally as a young man. Here, a small gathering of close friends shares the joy of making music, guitarists and percussionists interlocking rhythms as the singer takes the melody while strumming along. His companions all look toward him in admiration, feeling the shifts and nuances of tune together. Juan Gonzalez, who was born in Cuba and came to the United States in 1961, made this sacred altar to his family and identity. This piece is called Nacimiento, or Nativity, from 1979, and it is not even nearly as big as the smaller overall version. It's a miniature painting. It's a watercolor executed in a miniatures technique, painted with the use of a magnifying glass and jeweler's lamp. He fit the watercolor into a wooden cabinet, which you see there, to give the impression of a religious object. It shows a stage-like setting, a marble terrace overlooking a memory landscape of Cuba. Gonzalez's mother sits at lower right, as though enthroned, and his father is at the center holding a shepherd's crook right here. The artist told a writer that he spent over a month painting his mother's portrait in the retable, quote, trying to get at some psychological truth about my relationship with her. I just couldn't let go until I felt I had had that. Gonzalez's lover at the time, Ronald McKenna, stands behind his father right here, just off center, and the artist appears twice, once from behind, looking back toward Cuba, and then again in the lower left, discarding a white garment. The whole composition honors where Gonzalez came from and the life he was living in 1979. It places it in an invented space, partly inside and out, a tangible place though constructed from caprice and memory. Ann Minnick, who was Gonzalez's close friend, depicted him in Hungry Jesus, a drawing from 1978 that the Kohlers donated to the Minneapolis Institute of Art when I was there, and also did a related drawing that's at PAFA, showing him in sequential moments of dancing. Minnick's vision of her friend is that of a saint or a martyr, calling out in pain or ecstasy, experiencing an altered state. He holds himself, arms wrapped around in a garment that seems like it also could constrain. Minnick's Gonzalez is a figure of extremes, passionate and mercurial, sexy yet volatile. Here's another drawing that Anne did of Juan's torso, his chest, which is, again, it's super small. It's only about 6 by 6 inches. Sexuality is a thread throughout the Kohler Collection, with artists of all identities making imagery that is forthright about desire. I'm just showing you a group that will all be up on view upstairs. Roland Eyre is a Philadelphia artist drawing called Orgasm. Jane Lund's pastel self-portrait called The Priestess. Map of the Morning Dance by Robert Lostutter. Christina Ramberg's False Bloom, and Ann Minnick's The Anglican and the Jew. Tabitha Vevers, whose work you see here, regularly incorporates sexual pleasure in her work, as in relaying of a dream or painting of women making love with crustaceans. These are both dream images that are based on Tabitha collecting flying dream accounts from friends and then making little ex-photo paintings commemorating them. And then here's, you like what you like. Women making love with crustaceans. Many examples of that in Tabitha Vevers' work that the Kohlers all collected. She also reimagines Eden with bodies that evade binaries, open and fluid, existing without shame in a new world. This theme underscores a dual imperative in Vevers' practice. Quote, I wanted to take the female figure back from art history and on a personal level to my own body, to own my own body, my sexuality. I came of age in the 1970s amid the sexual revolution and the rise of feminism, but none of this was reflected in the official canon of art history. I set out to correct that. Painting narrative, figurative paintings went against the tide of what white male artists were doing. End quote. Vevers made a point to work small, encouraging close looking, fostering intimacy with the viewer. Quote, I enjoyed luring viewers in with the quiet beauty of the detail and luminosity of the paintings, and then giving them a good wake-up slap when they realized what they were actually looking at. Many Kohler Collection artists imagine a better world, or a place in which joy is foregrounded, and we are free to be ourselves. Gina Litherland's women, two examples that you see here, exist in harmony with the landscape, communing with all species of creatures and part of the whole ecosystem. She says, quote, "I think of them as utopian and in some way counteracting the disrespect for nature that has got us where we are today. I like the view of ecofeminism, that the suppression of nature and the suppression of women, and I would add to all marginalized people, are linked together. They're paintings about relationality, about our reciprocity and our need to be in communion with the world." She says, "In my paintings, the women are forming alliances with animals and plants." The art historian Suzanne Hudson has argued that by 1990, a time in which the Kohlers were especially active in collecting, painting was, she says, quote, "painting was, to many critics and practitioners, a thing of the past. Its supposed irrelevance was revealed over slow decades, supplanted by conceptual and technological practices. But as we have seen, painting, representational, realist, never lost visibility and critical relevance. Artists continue to make slow, meditative, careful painting, crafting intensely personal, clear, and detailed images. It has been a vital thread in 20th and 21st century art. They shifted with changes in culture, in critical engagements with politics, identity, and methods, but a fickle, distracted, and exploitative part of the art world has largely ignored it and its antecedents, likely owing to the challenge of marketing artwork that defies labels, requires slow looking, and deals with difficult, though deeply human content, and is modest in scale. Frances Cohen Gillespie, whose self-portrait you see here and is on view upstairs, drew on these methods to, quote, "escape my emotional problems and rectify the confusion of reality through the concentration of my selections. I would like my paintings to breathe. I don't imitate things I stare at, but their presence lends me to courage and to invent, and is a reminder that life is more complex than anything I can set down with clarity," end quote. Her husband, Gregory Gillespie, asserted his ethos, rare in an art world that privileged immediacy and serial production, and also refuted the hand. He said, "The most important thing I've learned is the value of patience with each painting. In this culture, it is like we are all on speed, and we're trained to go after things in a very compulsive way. I've learned to take my time with my paintings. They take just as long as they need to take, sometimes years. And when I'm into a piece, I keep reminding myself to slow down, even more so things can happen without there being too much force of will, or at the very least, a balance is set up between will and playfulness." A new generation of figurative artists has pushed back at market pressures to produce, to be a brand, or to make things for clients. PAFA graduate Njideka Akanyuli Crosby, for instance, whose piece you see here, not in the Kohler Collection, has established boundaries that allow her to stay true to who she is and prevent exploitation by the market. She noted in a 2023 New York Times profile, quote, "Something I've been very clear about with everybody I work with is my pace is slow and you cannot push me or force me to work faster." She continued, "I'm not a machine. I like taking my time. Normally, I would have said it takes me about 3 months to do a work, but it's slowly been extending into longer." She said, "I've slowed down to get what I need." What she needs may be what connects us, the time to be present and understand who we are in a constantly shifting world, the need to be grounded for ourselves and our loved ones. The artists in the Kohler Collection played a long game of investing in deeply personal subjects, communicated clearly to their viewers, not knowing whether they would find an audience, but putting everything into these self-contained worlds. They should know we are here, and we are ready to go with them to the other side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Bob from the audience? Yes, please, ask your question.
All right.
Please project.
Yes. So I noticed within the presentation, even withstanding that a lot of the artworks are not going to be on display, there are a lot where the body is severely reinterpreted with different anatomy, or created through allegory, or what is the name?
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, or created through allegory, or even in some cases the body is completely implied when there's no body there. So, given the very vast definition of what a body is, of how bodies are depicted in this case, what exactly was your sort of groundwork for defining what the theme of a body means for this exhibition?
So, in this presentation, in the essay that I wrote for the catalog, in a nutshell, what I'm arguing is that there is this parallel, simultaneous thread that has been critical in basically, the 20th century and into the 21st, where artists have really foregrounded their experience of what it means to be in a body. And that can take lots of different kinds of forms because we all have these different kinds of experiences of gender, of culture, of all the things that make us who we are, but also connect us with communities. And one of the things that I would say, these artists are doing, especially somebody like, Gregory Gillespie, for instance, or somebody like Charles Searles, is that they are using the tools of representation and a realist method. So they're making sure that you can clearly identify what it is that you're looking at, rather than an abstract or conceptual piece, in order to convey the feelings and the meanings of the body that they want you to get. You may or may not get them, but that's in a nutshell what they're doing. And I can't emphasize how much that kind of work has been denigrated as backwards and non-progressive and old-fashioned and conservative in critical histories of the period, particularly after 1945. And it affected how art history was taught, how museums collected, who was considered an art world superstar, whether you give that any credence at all. And it really led to a certain way that it was being taught. So when these artists were coming of age and studying at art schools, a lot of them were studying at art schools in the early 60s, or some of the younger ones. I mean, Craig Calderwood is probably the youngest artist in the collection, but at the time that they were in art school, they may have felt, I want to figure out how to paint the body and I want to make it commensurate with my experience. But a lot of them were being dissuaded from doing that because it didn't seem like it was relevant to contemporary society. But what I'm saying is, even though that was a thing, all these painters continue to do that. They continue to paint, and they continue to figure out new ways of making paintings of bodies that didn't look like a 19th century painting. It was relevant, and it was using contemporary experience, and it was a way of gradually kind of mutating it and transforming it. And that hasn't been said enough. There's this kind of thing that happens in art criticism every once in a while, or you'll see it, even in Hyperallergic, where they're like, the return to the figure's hot again. The figure never, ever, ever, ever goes away. People are constantly using it. And like with abstraction, there's a rainbow of ways of using it. There is definitely work that is clinical and based on objection, and nothing extraneous comes into the picture. And then there's something like this, which you can identify what that is, but the exact way that that person looks in Charles Searles' image is likely not going to be walking around. But you understand what he's getting at and the extra stuff that he's putting in it, which he has learned from studying abstraction, makes it a new kind of figure. So, the basic kind of argument is that the Kohler Collection is full of this stuff. They were collecting things that other people weren't collecting, and they were also collecting things that others may have dissuaded them from collecting. But they followed this gut because they felt personally invested in it. They also collected, like Linda Lealter, who gave her Art by Women collection here, they made a point of collecting work by artists who were alive so that they could either talk to them or they would know they're getting support, but they also would really kind of understand where these people are coming from. So that kind of thing just hasn't been said enough, that it was always still happening and is kind of pushed to the side because it doesn't seem like it's ever been treated with that much importance. It's a very long way of answering your question. I have no idea if I did.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. My question was very long-winded, so I suppose
I mean, the other thing too is that the point I make early is that for a lot of these artists, Jane Lund makes these images that are really, you can imagine maybe walking in on that scene, but she tweaks things slightly, but she wasn't looking at any of this. This is in part out of her imagination, or as she says, sometimes she staged things from photographs, but to her, this is real. These are things that are inside of her, but she wants to figure out, how do I make that tangible? So that's another thread that's like in what these people are using a realist method for. Mm-hmm. Did you have a question behind?
Yeah, a little bit. So you mentioned that they were collecting from living artists a lot, and that there's a heavy focus on the artists painting themselves in a way that they want to be received.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there's a heavy focus on authorial intent, in a sense, across this exhibition. And I don't know, I don't have an exact question. I'm just a little curious to see, or to ask about how you think that interplay or like mixture of like a heavily curated collection of paintings with a lot of authorial intent involved, and then kind of like observing that as a viewer, all these different dream worlds that you are essentially walking into. I don't know, that seems very interesting to me, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I would say the genre that
The Cohlers didn't collect, they didn't collect abstraction, although at one point when I was here at PAFA, I did convince them to buy a couple of pieces by Evelyn Statzinger for the collection, which is the only time that Rob and Francis didn't agree. It worked out. But even Evelyn Statzinger uses representational imagery, but it's biomorphic, it's not things that you would be able to pick up in the world, but it's still conveying a kind of imagery. And so there's nothing of that, and there's almost no landscape. There's maybe one or two pure landscapes, one's by an artist named Peter Dean that they collected a lot, but they were interested in people, in the body, and they were also very much interested in when artists look at themselves, what do they see? When artists look at somebody who's very close to them, what comes out in that? You can make it look real and like the person that was in front of you, but unconsciously do other things come in there that say something about your relationship with that person? That's what they were really interested in. So a lot of the collection is self-portraits, or is portraits of other people who are intimates. And a lot of the work that there was a dealer named Alan Frumkin, and the George Adams Gallery is kind of like that was the predecessor to it. George Adams, who has a gallery in New York and on the West Coast, represented a lot of these artists, and he still has a gallery. But Alan Frumkin was his mentor, and he came up like studying with him as a dealer. And Alan Frumkin said to the Kohlers at one point, his advice was, buy the toughest work you can stand. And this picture by Jane Lund was one of the first things that they bought together. They saw this in a gallery in Boston, I think, and they were like, ew, what the heck is this? And they were kind of repelled by it initially, and they were like, could we live with that? And as they were driving away, they kept thinking about it individually. They would not leave them. It was haunting them, and they thought, oh my God, there's something to this. So they wound up buying it. And that kind of feeling of like, this is getting inside of me, and there's something here, and every time I look at it, I'm going to be changed, and it's going to change me. That's the thing that they really chased. And that, I think, characterizes a lot of the intensity of the work that they collected that'll eventually be at PAFA permanently. So, thanks for coming. I just want to say, Rob and Francis have been good friends. When I started at PAFA in 2004 as a young curator, I did meet them maybe a year and a half later, and they've been nothing but generous and kind and are really down to earth. And one of the things I wanted to also say is, they watched Linda Lee Alter's process of deciding to give her collection here. And I think in part that inspired them. They also really wanted their collection to be in Philadelphia. And I hope that the generosity that the Kohlers have exhibited, not just to Woodmere and PAFA, but in other places around the country, inspires other folks, particularly of more means than the Kohlers have had, to donate major collections to PAFA, because these things need to be in the public. People need to be able to see them. They need to be shared and studied and lived with, and students of all stripes from all different places need to be able to come here and see them. And so I think what the Kohlers are doing is incredible and invaluable to continuing